Hello, everyone, and welcome to our program and our segment today. We're so glad to have each and every one of you with us as usual. This has definitely been a very interesting and long journey. COP28 has both many lows and a couple highs. And as you'll see from the headlines today, probably a few more lows before we reach the end. But I suppose that's kind of what we expected coming out of a petro state like, the UAE, especially being held in the oil capital of the world. And you can definitely see how the narrative is continuing to develop towards more oil leaning folks and the delegates at COP28. So for now, I just like to say, welcome and, let's continue on our journey together as we explore what COP28 has in store for us for the end. First, I'd like to go over a few headlines as per normal. And I think the big one coming out of today is that the major first draft for COP28's resolution does not include fossil fuel phase outs. This is a fairly big sticking point, mostly because the over the past few years, ever since Paris, and then major accomplishments in Madrid and Glasgow seem to have been little baby steps towards this inevitable outcome where we would finally agree that fossil fuels are the biggest, most important change we need to make as a society. Especially in Glasgow, we're talking about methane. In Madrid, we're talking about the use of coal and the phasing out of coal specifically. However, it seems like even today, at this COP28, 28 years after the initial discussions on international phasing out of climate destructive technologies, we're still reaching a point where it seems very unlikely that we're going to reach those terms, those words, as fossil fuel phase outs that everybody was hoping would come out of this major conference. Also, interestingly enough, it does seem like more fuel is going to be added to the fire when it comes to the future political situations across the globe, especially next year, as President Biden's numbers seem to be faltering and failing over Trump. I mean, two recent polls were released today that shows that if the election were today, many of them would suggest that Trump would have won in our 2024 election, which is extraordinarily important for us to use in this context of COP28. Because not only did we see President Trump withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords as soon as he became president, but it's very likely that he will withdraw a second time if elected president once again. So amongst all these headlines, I suppose, is the important message that we need to be reaching out to all of all of our folks, all of our circles, to remind them that this is the most important time to get involved, the most important time to act. Because these headlines, if true, are very devastating for the future of humankind. So now the best time to get involved was yesterday. The second best time is today. Without further ado, though, I think maybe it's best, now that we have all the depressing headlines out of the way, to maybe go to something a little bit less depressing. And that's where I segue into our very own Michael Fidler to showcase what's going on the ground at COP28 and maybe uplift our spirits just a little bit. So, Michael, I turn it over to you.
Oh, I wish I could lift up your spirit. I wish I could lift up my spirit as well, but I've been down with a horrible flu for the last 2 days because the AC running everywhere, and you go from 30 plus 30 degrees C in the street to 15 C in the metro, and then you go outside and you do it 15 times a day, these changes, and for 15 days already, or maybe even 20 days for me, then I just couldn't take it anymore. I'm down with the flu. So I did not really go to COP28 today, but I'm glad to report I can still show you some images, and today it will not be from COP28, but it will be from the country of COP29, from Azerbaijan and from Baku, because I visited the country maybe 6 years ago. So let me show you some images from this country so you get an idea of what to expect another year. And If you think that Dubai is the capital of oil these days, then Baku was the capital of oil about 100 years ago. And this is how Baku looks like. And if there is no phase out from this COP, I can assure you there will be no phase out from the next COP, because Azerbaijan, as you can tell, 90% of its economy, it's still, or 90% of its export is still gas and oil. So 75% of its income come from gas and oil. So would you expect that a country like that would want to phase out? I don't think so. Now let's go to Azerbaijan and let's stay a little positive. This is Azerbaijan is a small country in South Caucasus, roughly the size of half of Florida, say maybe 10 million people living there. It's very ambitious. It has big ambitions, and it has a funicular in the center. It was hosting the European championship in football a couple of years ago. It was hosting also the European Games. It's sort of the soft version of Olympic Games a couple of years ago. And there are some very modern buildings in the city center. This is probably the building they are the most proud of. This building is called the Flames Tower, and it should basically remind you, or it should look like a fire. So this is a shot just taken at night. Now there are also a few other very modern and futuristic buildings. This one is called Heydar Aliyev Center, and Aliyev is the clan which has been running the country since the collapse of the Soviet Union for about the last 30 years. The Heydar Aliyev was the first president after the collapse of Soviet Union. And then he ran the country for about 10 years, and then his son took over, and he has been running the country for about 21 years right now. And if you look at the names of the ministers, every third name in that group is somehow related to the Aliyevs. So Aliyevs are running the country the way they want to. They had some money, and they spent the money there in the city center of Baku. This is, for example, Little Venice. They just have there, you can rent a gondola in the middle of Baku, or as everywhere in the post-Soviet countries, there are these Ferris wheels that are just very popular. You can also go to F1 races in Baku, where the F1 formulas are running just through the city center. So there is stuff too that is happening there. Baku has also some history. There are some fortifications or remnants of the fortifications and towers. It's not really, it's visually quite attractive city if you are in the city center. But my experience was that the city was kind of sleepy. Maybe this image should evoke what I felt there. It was just kind of sleepy. Not much was going on when I was there. As soon as you leave the fancy city center, you just go into blocks of flats, the Soviet-style block of flats, and you can walk among them, not for hundreds of meters, but for kilometers. You just walk along the block of flats, all kind of colors, setups, blocks of flats. And once you are on the outskirts of the city, the blocks of flats eventually end, and then there are these small houses that are just glued together at the outskirts of the town. You know, Baku is also a big harbor, and next few images will show you why the harbor is there. Because it was, as I said previously, Baku used to be a capital of the oil about 100 years ago. Even the Battle of Stalingrad, which was fought in 1944, if I'm not mistaken, was basically about having an access to all the oil which Baku and its fields has there. Originally, they were getting the oil from the Absheron Peninsula. It's about 10-15 kilometers east from Baku. But even if you walk through Baku today, on the outskirts, you easily get images like that with all the oil fields there. They are still there, and they are still producing some gas there. So this is not something I had to really wander around and seek for images like that. It was very easy. As soon as you just get to the edge of the city, it is there. And the Absheron Peninsula is really polluted. And you see there everywhere these areas where they drilled the oil previously, and now they just left it like it was. So it's extremely polluted. And I really wouldn't want to have a house in an area like that. Now, they have gotten most of the gas from the land, so they moved the drilling into the offshore, into the Caspian Sea. And I'm afraid that they will pollute the Caspian Sea just the way they polluted the land in the Absherbes Peninsula and around, because you can see the drills everywhere. Now, one thing which is very interesting is you don't really see it often. I was always wondering how they found the gas there or the oil. And if you walk around, this is an image you would kind of guess that there was a cistern or a truck that had an accident and it just spilled it. No, that's not the truth. There was a truck that went just through the mud, through the field, and the oil is basically in the ground right everywhere. So it just goes up like this. That you can see that this oil field, it's completely natural. The land in some places is completely soaked with oil, just like this. Sometimes it's also soaked with natural gas. This place is called Janardak, which would probably translate as a burning mountain, and the gas is being leaking through the rocks and mud for hundreds of years. And in this specific spot, I read that the herdsman just lit a cigarette, and by accident he just ignited a fire there, and it has been burning like this for about 70 years now. And you can see there are more places like this very easily. So it's really soaked with gas and oil. And this is just one more interesting feature there. It's called mud volcanoes. It's not really a volcano with lava, but it's a gas that's just going through the mud, which diluted in water. So it forms these interesting formations. So from the geological point of view, it's very interesting. Now, it's one of the most polluted country I have ever visited. And well, I took a goal of visiting all the post-Soviet countries, and this would be a front runner when it comes to the pollution, because the trash is just everywhere. You cannot go away from this. I don't like to show these images, but it's very hard to take in Azerbaijan an image where there is no trash. I mean, you have to go deep in the mountains, somewhere in the Caucasus, until you find an image without trash. This is just under the Caucasus, so there is no waste management at all. You either burn the trash or you just throw it behind the house or in the river, and you hope it goes somewhere else. So waste management, that's tough there. When in Baku, I show some images where it showed that it's pretty modern, the center, but as soon as you leave the fancy city of Baku, you basically go to these small villages where the infrastructure is at very low level, and the streets there or the roads, they might be quite challenging. It's not easy to drive there. Here would be just an image of a road in the desert. So after a rain, it might be really a challenge just to get through the desert. I just wanted to show a few images from some of the local markets where they have these seeds and dried fruit. And it should be, I wanted to this section relate to the agronomy there, but I did not really see any mechanics there. Most of the work I have seen on the fields were really just done by women. And they were doing all the work with their bare hands. They had no mechanization at all. So there were also many of these herdsmen with sheep and horses and cattle and stuff like that. But there were also some of these greenhouses. But half or 1/3 of the country is basically a desert. And the people who are living there, it's really very hard manual labor there. It's also very, I would say, natural still in some of the valleys in Caucasus. Here I just ran across a horse that just gave a birth, and I've never seen that before, so it was just an interesting image to take. Now, and this would be the irrigation system I've seen there. That's pretty primitive, I would say. Just I think I'm coming to the very last section of this show. I just wanted to show you also some landscape of Azerbaijan. 1/3 of the country, or roughly 1/3 of the country, are just deserts, and there's almost nothing in the desert unless you see some pipe or maybe some electrical cables. But otherwise, that's a very rough desert when it can get really tough there. 1/3 of the country are roughly 1/3 are these steppes, just something between the desert and it going towards the mountain. So there are these wide open steppes which are difficult to photograph because it's basically just empty space. And then you finally get to the mountains, to the Caucasus Mountains. And I think that's the highlight of the country for me, because they are very high. The mountains are very high, over 4,500 meters. Yeah, that's something. Obviously, the transportation there is not so easy because 4,500 meters really high. But then if you get to the lower Caucasus, there are all these small villages, and even if you are experienced in this region, you still couldn't tell whether this is in Azerbaijan or Armenia, or it might be even in Kyrgyzstan. As soon as you leave the capital city, it starts to look like the usual post-Soviet area, and you cannot really tell which country is that. Now, I think I'm coming to the end of the slideshow today. This would be probably the image of Azerbaijan, how I kind of dreamt about it, how it would look like. And I think this is the last image of the day, showing that, well, that this will be my take on Azerbaijan. And I'm turning it back to Iraq.
Amazing, Michael. I think we know what to expect next year in Azerbaijan. Yeah, yes, John.
It was interesting to see Michael's photos of the flaring of the fire mountain. And it's important to understand that it's better to have that fire rather than the gas simply leaking, because as the gas leaks, it's leaking as methane. And that's much more harmful than carbon dioxide. And when it's ignited, when it burns off, it converts that CH4, that methane, into CO2, which is longer lasting in the atmosphere, but less damaging as far as the greenhouse gas effect.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, Rock, you talked about the headlines, about how it appears now that there may be no progress towards a phase out, a phase down of fossil fuels due to the leadership of this COP, the presidency and the other nations supporting them. So I suppose that, you know, when I look at this, we entered into this with an open mind as far as the location in the UAE and the presidency held by an oil executive. But now, as it's beginning to play out, they had their opportunity, and it seems to be manifesting that their intent in leading this COP was not to lead it to progress, but to try to slow it down as much as possible relative to the fossil fuel industry.
It's possible that it's just a question of a conflict with Saudi Arabia. I've understood that a lot has come out today, that it's the Saudis that are really pushing back hard against any kind of phasing out of fossil fuels.
Yeah, OPEC has had an extraordinarily large impact on this conference. And when you actually read the first draft, I spent a few minutes before our session just looking through and skimming through real quick. It looks and it reads to me like a buffet. There's a lot of language about tripling the use of renewable energy by 2030. There's a couple lines, and by a couple, I mean there's not very many lines about nuclear language. And it seems like there's some language about unabated coal use. There's no language about phasing out of fossil fuels. So it seems like you can pick and choose what you want out of this final draft document. Nothing in stone. And I think, you know, in the past, we definitely discussed the theoretical concept that nothing strong is ever going to come out of these COP conferences until we have some sort of carbon accounting, the exact measurements that we're going to need to be reducing our carbon footload by. Until we have some strict program set up by a body like the UN, there's really going to be no accountability. Even if there was language that said phase out fossil fuels, there's no actual accountability that's going to be put into place that's going to force nations to agree and adopt those programs.
Well, I think that you have to start with the baseline of the stock take, and that also is not yet agreed. First, you have to understand where you are and then have those metrics to really be able to measure and enforce some kind of accountability.
Yes, very, very true. Not to mention, you know, if we're going to consistently subsidize the fossil fuel industry, and then the fossil fuel industry just turns right around and uses that as subsidies for their lobbying efforts, which, I think a lot of folks might agree that the lobbying efforts of the fossil fuel industry are probably the biggest reason why we still have as large of an impact from the fossil fuel delegates today, which is rather unfortunate for a number of reasons. The first being that we will simply never get politicians we'll never get politicians that are, strictly in the fight to phase out fossil fuels as early as possible, simply because there's so many other people that are being bought out by the fossil fuel industry in more than one way. And I think, I'm not sure myself, and I'm not going to exactly say that I think it's a for sure thing, but I am very curious that how much as much money as we use to subsidize the fossil fuel industry, what percentage of that goes right around to lobbying? I don't know. My assumption is quite a bit. I don't think that this happens as much in Europe as it is in the US, but I'd be very curious to find out what that number is. I am now curious about what everyone has seen over in the individual sessions taking place over in COP28. Is there anything interesting that anybody has been able to pay attention to, extract information from, interesting people? What has everyone seen today?
I was fortunate enough to be able to attend Secretary General Gutierrez' press conference this morning, which was very interesting. He used some pretty strong language, but in the end, he said, we must all compromise. We have to get there. We must all compromise, which sounded, of course, we have to compromise, but it somehow forewarned of a disappointment that we are not going to get what we want in terms of really putting in strong language about phasing out or phasing down fossil fuels.
Yeah, I'm really glad you got to attend one of his speeches. I love the guy. He seems absolutely amazing, and he does the best job that he possibly can to unite people. And every time I hear any of his speeches, that they're really electrifying. Like you can tell that he cares. It's just without those enforcement mechanisms, it really is just a strong speech. Money will always talk louder than any speech, unfortunately. But I'm very glad that you got to hear his presentation. How long was it?
It was exactly 6 minutes and 16 seconds because I recorded it.
Very nice.
I think, yeah, we may have a chance to replay that at some point, but it was interesting for me to be a matter of feet away from him and to feel his energy in person and the passion behind. I mean, this is such a critical issue for him. You see that, you understand that. He did take questions. It was a powerfully delivered address press conference.
That's wonderful. Yeah, he's such a great fellow. What other sessions has everyone attended today? What other content has come out of COP28 that you've seen on the ground?
I attended a session this morning, which was really a continuation of some of the experiences that I had yesterday. Today was about the legal system, law and climate, and how the legal system can be a catalyst for change. And there were experts, people from the American Bar Association, justices and legal experts explaining in different sessions today just how important the legal mechanisms are. You've got to have the activists, you have to have the education, but you also have to have the national and international courts of law to enforce, to recognize what injustice is so that they can enforce the law and justice. And I think that was a key message to take away, because no matter what agreements they come out with here, if there is no accountability, if it's not somehow binding and overseen by people in the international arena and in various national arenas, then it will be ineffective.
Yeah, it's a really important point.
So
Okay.
we talked with Senator Markey yesterday, had a nice good chat with him, and he was on his way to a press conference that he held with several other senators, the usual suspects from last year, White House and Pardon, and then also Republican Murkowski. And I'll talk more about that probably tomorrow. But the House also participated, and there was a delegation from the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And of course, the House of Representatives is controlled by the Republicans, so it's a Republican-led committee. And moderating that session was a person from the Conservative Climate Foundation. And the way they described that organization, whereas, we heard EESI speak about how they're nonpartisan and science-based and they provide just the facts. Basically, this organization says that they try to educate the members of Congress from a conservative perspective. So you've got one organization that's trying to be even-handed and stick to science, and another that is clearly taking a partisan approach in what facts they deliver to these members of Congress. And in this session was Republican Kelly Armstrong, Republican from North Dakota, and this was his first COP. And then also Republican Buddy Carter from Georgia, also his first COP. And then Representative Marinette Miller Meeks, and this, she said, was her third COP. And it was very interesting. They were talking about the Republicans' approach to addressing climate. And what struck me odd about that was, we've been watching the Republican positions on this issue for decades, and forever they were saying that climate change just was not happening. It just wasn't a thing. It wasn't for real. So now they're here. Now they're admitting that something is happening. And then before, they were also, their next argument was, well, it's sort of happening, but it's not human cause. Well, if it's not human cause, why are you here at the Conference of Parties where our objective is, the world's objective is to reduce the human causes of climate change? So that mantra of theirs has been rolled back by them themselves. And then their next argument has always been, well, it would cost too much to fix. And then their next argument after that was, well, other nations won't help. And then their final argument has always been, well, it's too late to fix. Just no hope for doing anything about it. So it appears that they're down to the would cost too much and other nations won't help arguments. And interestingly, that's exactly what I heard in this session. Each of the speakers was focusing on those points. They basically said that, for example, Armstrong, he comes from an oil family. They have oil producing wells themselves in North Dakota. And he says, well, we do clean oil. We do clean oil and natural gas. And we have a great story to tell on that topic. And what struck me was that it's a story. They're actually saying it's a story. In other words, we're not looking to solve the problem. We're just here to tell a story. And he later went on to say, well, the reason he's here, whereas, it may be hard to fix this problem, but the voters care about it now. So we have to address it. Well, what he's saying is they're here as Republicans simply because they know the voters are starting to move. And if they don't move in some form or fashion, at least in greenwashing or pretending they want to help, they're going to be in trouble with the voters. But, Carter from Georgia talked about clean energy, and he talked about affordable energy. He talked about how when the Republicans took over the House of Representatives, they were allowed the first 10 bills. They could name the first 10 bills, HR 1, HR 2, all the way to HR 10. And HR 1 was affordable energy. And he tried to spin that off as somehow because he had the word energy in there, he was addressing climate change. When in fact, it's exactly the opposite. When they say clean or cheap energy, they mean coal and oil. They do not mean solar. They do not mean wind. Of course, as the years go on, these have become the affordable energy sources. So they are not leading on this. They are following. But both Carter and Meeks, and eventually Armstrong, focused on nuclear. And that appears to be the best hope for cooperation between the Democrats and Republicans. Now,
True.
it's not to say that each side is investing the money or taking the actions in Congress to invest, but they're at least talking about that issue. So it's probably something we need to focus on. They also focus on China. Chinese Communist Party. They repeated that several times. Interestingly, they never mentioned the Russians. They mentioned the Ukraine war, but only in the sense of saying it's a problem because it's disrupted energy supplies to Europe. And gee, that's a problem. And gee, they should have, they should have more oil and gas coming from the United States or other places. So it was very interesting. Armstrong, when he went to speak, the moderator introduced him and said, the keep it in the ground crowd is pretty alive and well, referring to this COP28. And then she said, North Dakota would beg to differ. So basically she was saying, she's on board with the Saudis, and these Republican representatives are on board with the Saudis, that they do not want to see any drawdown of fossil fuels. They simply want to promote nuclear and others as a potential cheaper replacement. So it tells us that really, if the partisan politics continues and the Republicans are able to block the higher aspirations of our Democratic representatives, then the only possibility is for Congress to invest heavily in research and development on renewable energies, wind, solar, geothermal, and nuclear, and drive down the cost of those technologies to where it will become a Republican attractor simply because it's cheaper and allows them to have greater economic activity. So, in general, I was somewhat hopeful at the beginning that these Republican representatives come and appear to be engaging, but that doesn't seem to hold true. They are here to block. They are here to say words, but not take action.
Really interesting to hear your perspective. But I have to say it is a step forward that at least they came here and they are going to be surrounded and exposed to different opinions while they're here. Hopefully it's a step forward.
Yeah,
but it's so interesting that you were able to attend that and listen carefully to what was being said. And I do think it's interesting that the one bipartisan agreement was on nuclear coming. This has been repeated to me several times, that nuclear is the one thing that they can agree upon in terms of bipartisan energy.
Well, there's still contention there because, Democrats, what we traditionally wanted is new nuclear. We wanted research and development over the past 20 to 30 years to develop new nuclear technologies that would be even safer and not have the proliferation issues. Now, because we have not done that investment, because we could not have bipartisan agreement on that front and overcome challenges in the public arena, we don't have those technologies on hand. So what are we faced with? We're faced with, if we want to scale up nuclear quickly, we've got to do it with the old pressurized water reactors, which are inherently far more risky than the new technologies that are in the offing.
I also attended the plenary, which started late this afternoon with all the country representatives. It was a pretty packed house. They were honoring the climate champions. There's a climate champion that's chosen for each year, and then all the countries begin to discuss what their objectives are. And it was one interesting thing that I noted was once the climate champions for each COP year had been introduced and the main panel took the stage, a young woman, small, almost a girl, she must have been a teenager, ran up on stage with a sign and started shouting her passionate plea to save the planet. And it went on. She was shouting and shouting and just imploring the audience and all the delegates there to heed the calls of the youth. And security was coming. They didn't know what quite to do, and they were going to try and control her. And finally, and this took place over several minutes, the audience started clapping for her. The entire audience started clapping for her. She left the stage with some security, and then the president of the Egypt COP was at the podium, and he said, "That was so wonderful. I want everyone to give her another hand. And I want everyone to understand that it is because of people like her and all the activists here and all the agents and people from every perspective that have allowed us, have forced us, allowed us, and enabled us to accomplish what we have so far and what we will be able to accomplish in the future." So she deserves a huge round of applause. I was surprised it was handled that way, and I was also moved to see that it was handled that way.
Yeah, many of the COP conferences that I've attended is there's a lot of interaction by youth that are showcasing their, very strong emotional connection to the planet, their future, and also to their understanding of history and knowing human history, knowing human reluctance to change, especially with a monetary incentive. Individuals like that, my heart goes out to them, and I hope they continue to do what they do, because as much as it is important for young people to be studying, study hard, but I think as the saying goes, protest harder. Okay, I think next we have a video interview. I don't know what day it was recorded, but I think Michael has
It was recorded today.
Recorded today. Nice. Okay.
Early this morning.
We
So
love
it was
current news.
yesterday for Michal Dietrich, but it was very early this morning for me.
Sounds good. I'm glad we have that then. So Michael, I think you have the file format, right?
Yes, I'm clicking the button right now, and here we go.
Good evening for you, Michal. It's early in the morning for us here in Dubai. I'm so grateful that you're able to join us here to report on what's been going on with COP28. Michal Dietrich is the chair of the DNC's Environment and Climate Crisis Council. She is as versed in what's going on down on the ground and in the United States in terms of policy and our fight to meet the climate change challenges as just about anybody I know. I am so grateful for your input today. I have a couple of questions for you. We're going to keep it short today. I know it's late there for you in Michigan. There's a lot of controversy and discussion about fossil fuels here. Yesterday, the president of the COP28, Al Jaber, tried to get everybody together in a powwow to agree to language to phase out or phase down fossil fuels, unabated fossil fuels, abated fossil fuels, meaning that they would capture some of the emissions from the production of fossil fuels and the burning of fossil fuels. We don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of opposition from some of the petrostates and what kind of language is going to go in. But I do know that in the United States and other places around the world, there is an important discussion on fossil fuel subsidies, which amount to $7 trillion a year. John Kerry made an important announcement about his intentions with fossil fuel subsidies. And I'm wondering, Michal, what are your thoughts on this issue and how you think this might unfold within the U.S. Congress
within the White House? What is possible, and what can the White House do on its own?
Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation. It's always a delight to speak with you, and I'm really grateful for the important analyses that you've been carrying out there on the ground at COP28. It's been invaluable. So, what an important question. Fossil fuel subsidies absolutely have to go. You know, that number topped 7 trillion, or over 7% of global GDP, according to the IMF. That's $13 million a minute. And the trend line is bad. That 7 trillion, was a $2 trillion increase since 2020. And meanwhile, this is during a time when the biggest oil and gas companies made 200 billion in profits since 2022. So it's not as though they were suffering and needed to be propped up. And when you think about it, who are the subsidies benefiting? Well, they're benefiting the oil and gas companies with their obscene profits. And also they're benefiting the biggest consumers of fossil fuel energy, to the detriment of the global South and of brown, Black, Indigenous, and other frontline communities globally, and the global South, and here in the US. So turning to the US, subsidies are estimated at about $20 billion annually. So our leadership and our actions matter. And ending subsidies is a really powerful tool because they are literally propping up the fossil fuel industry. The profits in the industry are very volatile. And as recently as early 2020, fossil fuel companies were in serious economic trouble with major losses, rampant bankruptcies. Unfortunately, Trump took the opportunity to use taxpayer funds to bail them out through various relief programs. So by contrast, Democrats in the US have supported the end of subsidies going back at least to President Obama. In 2012, he called for the repeal of the subsidies, which at that point were at just an outrageous $4 billion plus at the federal level. So what can be done? Well, President Biden campaigned on ending fossil fuel subsidies. I'm proud of that. And he called again this summer for an end to them. In his 2023 budget, he proposed several specific policies to end the giveaways, including ending 2 of the most really outrageous subsidies that let the industry profit from tax code exceptions that other industries are not allowed to. So I'm hopeful that these things are going to happen. Subsidies are bad policy, they are bad economics, they're bad for the life of our planet. And the US should be, and I'm so proud to see, John Kerry and President Biden leading on this. We got to stop making handouts to an industry that is using our air, water, and soil as an open sewer, and that's poisoning all of them, darkening our future. So President Biden's been on the right side of this issue. Recently in Congress, Representative Blumenauer from Oregon introduced the End Oil and Gas Tax Subsidies Act of 2023. So got to make the end of the subsidies, though, a reality. It's a very challenging political environment, as you know, here in the US. And it means that climate is absolutely on the ballot in 2024. We need to reelect the president and the vice president. We need to take back the House. We need to hold, and if possible, increase our margin in the Senate and elect Democrats up and down the ballot, because there are indirect subsidies at the state levels as well that we need to end.
So well articulated, a big challenge ahead of us, and it means we all need to get down to work. 2024 is going to really determine the future of not just the US climate agenda, but the planet's. Thanks for that amazing answer, Michal. Now I'd like to turn to food systems and the Farm Bill. I want to read a quote that was issued by the UAE Minister of Environment. She said, or he said, even if you were able to fix the just energy transition and go completely renewable, you still wouldn't be able to reach the 1.5 degrees if you don't solve the food systems issue That's how big of a cause this is. Food systems will now be center stage in all future COPs. Now we know that, and it has been that there was a theme day, food systems, how people are going to feed themselves. But we know also in the United States, there's a farm bill which still needs to be renewed. A lot of the issues the same issues play into this in the United States, perhaps not to the same extent, but environmental justice issues. Of course, we understand that in many parts of the world, agriculture emits methane, perhaps 30% of the emissions that come out globally. I'd love for you to explore how this ties into the challenge we face with legislation and in the United States with our food systems, and how the food bill, farm bill, plays into environmental justice.
This is a great question. And I am so glad that COP is, bringing food and agricultural issues into the conversation. As a farmer myself, I am acutely aware of the contribution of agriculture to climate change and of the challenges that face farmers, even when we want to do the right thing. So as you mentioned, agriculture contributes up to about a third of greenhouse gas emissions globally. Here in the US, it's at least 10% of emissions from the agricultural sector. That's the EPA estimate. There are some indications that's low, but it's not as big a proportion of our overall emissions as it is globally. Still, because we are a major contributor, the largest historically emitter of greenhouse gases, and one of the largest globally, it's still a big chunk of emissions at a global scale, and really, really important. And at the same time, climate change itself is posing a serious threat to food systems with droughts, extreme storms, increased precipitation, actually exacerbated by things like the drawdown of aquifers, which are related and intersectional with other environmental issues. So on my own farm, we have nearly 50% more precipitation annually than we did just 25 years ago. That means that there have been 2 springs recently when we didn't manage to plant a spring crop because the fields were too wet to take equipment out in the fields. It would have gotten stuck and come out sometime in June or July. So one thing that I want to talk about is that the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in climate and environment ever, makes some excellent investments in farm bill programs. So that is something that's already happened, even if we haven't gotten a farm bill passed. So those investments have done things like helping to promote conservation of land, preserving natural areas that are already carbon sinks, where carbon is already being sequestered in the soil or through the roots of forests. And, we need to promote more carbon sequestration through agriculture, but we also need to protect the carbon sequestration that is already happening in our natural areas and in agriculture. So I'm hoping that through the Farm Bill or other related legislation, we're going to continue to build on the Inflation Reduction Act's new investments, which are conserving up to 125 million additional acres of land, more forest land. I'm also hoping to see biodiversity protection, because our food systems, our natural area protections, which are so linked, are crucial for biodiversity. And I'm seeing a movement toward protecting more wildlife corridors, increasing the importance for wildlife. With climate change, humans are migrating with climate, but animals also are changing their migration patterns. And they need them anyway with increased development. Wildlife bridges, such as we see in many countries in Europe, and more protection of sensitive areas like wetlands. So another thing that we've been calling for at the DNC Climate Council for some time is increased research, which USDA is very interested in and has been increasing money for already. But we need methods for, this is kind of getting in the weeds, pardon the pun, but to improve methods for growing perennial cereal crops. Where you don't have to plow up the land and put all that carbon back into the atmosphere. If you have wheat that can grow year after year after year without plowing it up, that's huge. It also decreases pesticide use and fertilizer use. Fertilizer is mostly fossil fuel based. So, right. So we also, as a matter of environmental justice, need to support and sustain small organic and family farms. One thing that we, again, are already doing through USDA is helping to fund, and there's been pushback from the other party, but is helping to fund farmers, ranchers, and fishers who've been historically underfunded and discriminated against their USDA programs, Black and brown farmers. And we need to keep SNAP, which is the money that helps people who are lower income to get fresh, good, healthy food. And it is really offensive that anyone would try to decrease that. It's good for farmers, it's good for families, it's good for children, it's good for our country. So once again, though, you know, the path to getting a good farm bill with all of the wonderful things that we can do for climate and the environment lies through Congress. And once again, these elections in November are so important. The president's taken a whole of government approach to fighting for clean air and clean water and for our future. And that includes the USDA. So we need to keep it science-based. I'm all for all the research we want, but we need to make sure that we are investing in programs that actually are reducing carbon and that are in the interests of environmental justice. And that means, again, supporting those small organic and family farms. The increasing mergers and conglomeration in agriculture are very concerning, and it's accelerating. So getting back, though, to those elections, it's a cliche. We say it every time, and every time it's more true that this election is the most important of our lifetimes.
Perfect. Such an illuminating answer. I really learned a lot from that. And I think you have highlighted just how much work is ahead for us and that we are on track with the right team in the White House, with the people that have surrounded him, and they are doing their best, and we need to help them help us. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michal, and we'll be in touch.
It's such a pleasure. Let's hope for a really good ending for COP, for people and planet.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing that, and thank you, Dana, for in that wonderful interview with Michal. I think that was showcased quite a bit of really good dialogue. I think really good dialogue.
I would like to comment on some of the things she highlighted. You know, she talked about the perennial cereal crops and the different cultivation methods. What she's talking about is more commonly referred to as no-till agriculture. And that was developed by what used to be called the Soil Tilth Lab. And tilth is one of those agricultural terms that refers to the structure and integrity of the soil. And that laboratory was at Iowa State University, where I studied in 1985 and 86 under the professors that actually set up and ran that laboratory and developed that no-till methodology. That laboratory is currently called the National Laboratory for Agriculture and the Environment, and it is in desperate need of the funding. So, whereas those Republican congressmen were talking about developing technology and then sharing it overseas, we need to invest in things like this national laboratory on agriculture to be able to develop these somewhat complex farming systems to enhance the soil health and sequester more carbon and reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere. She also talked about $7 trillion a year, as Dana mentioned as well, of global subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. Well, $7 trillion is that magic number that we kick around as 1/3 of the US GDP, the equivalent of what we spent in World War II battling for democracy. So the rest of the world is spending that much money to prop up the fossil fuel industry. That means that to just have a level playing field, renewable energies would need to be subsidized at the level of $7 trillion a year just to be on a competitive, even keel with fossil fuels. So until we achieve that level of subsidies for the better forms of energy, renewables are in effect trying to fight this battle for us with not just one, but two hands tied behind their back.
Good point, John.
A very important point to make. All right, I think we're coming up here on the end of our program. So now I'd like to showcase, or I'd like to, if anyone has any closing thoughts or comments, now is the time. So please feel free to make any more now. And
Tomorrow's
if
the
not,
last day, right?
yes, I think, wait, is it tomorrow or Wednesday that's the last day?
Tomorrow.
Yeah, it's tomorrow. It's tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh boy, so last broadcast is tomorrow. So please feel free to tune in then. And we're looking forward to sharing the last days of our adventure with you. So thank you so much for attending tomorrow. Very glad to have you there. And yes, we'll plan on seeing you all tomorrow. So thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everyone.